Oh, sorry. Didn't see you come in. Well, we won't waste any time. We'll get started. John D. Rockefeller grew up just about the same as every other child would, but he would turn into one of the biggest oil tycoons in American history. I'm Walt Whitaker. This is History's Mysteries. John D. Rockefeller was born July 8, 1839 in Richford, New York. Rockefeller later moved with his family to Cleveland, Ohio, and 6 years later established his first enterprise, a commission business dealing in hay, grain, meats, and other goods, with Maurice Clark. In 1863, Sam Andrews came to John Rockefeller to talk him into expanding into the oil industry. In 1865, with the help of Andrews, John bought out Clark's share of the company, and together they founded Rockefeller and Andrew Company.
Clark and Rockefeller's commission business thrived because their commodities were what the people wanted and what the people needed. Sam Andrews came to Rockefeller and said, "The oil business is where you want to be. Get out of the crummy commission house, 'cause you'll make big money on the oil that you sell."
Within 2 years of its formation, Rockefeller and Andrew Company became the largest refinery in the Cleveland area. Therefore, Rockefeller fully devoted himself to the oil industry. Due to Rockefeller and Andrews Oil Company's success, they were joined by a young businessman by the name of Henry Flagler, who joined the company to help with legal concerns. In 1870, Rockefeller and a few of his associates, such as Andrews, Flagler, and his brother William, together formed the Standard Oil Company, based off in Ohio. 2 years later, it controlled nearly all the oil refineries in Cleveland, due to the emphasis on economical operations. Now, how Standard Oil ran their company and how they made so much money. Standard Oil would be up here on top. Now, what they would do, they would take other companies that they would control, but they'd change the name of them, such as the Acme Oil Company, and such others that we could name later. They would use these companies to buy out other competitors in the area. Now, since the name changed, nobody would think that there would be any links between Standard Oil and such as the Acme Oil Company, and they would take control. Now, how the money was distributed was all about the shares. Acme would control the shares of here, but then all the shares would be linked back up to the Standard Oil trustees, who would be controlling this big giant web of oil industry. The use of the holding companies allowed the Standard Oil Company to avoid suspicion and circumvent around certain state laws, and with only 2 years, the Standard Oil Company bought over 100 refineries in the U.S.
In 1879, Alonzo Hepburn, the New York State Assembly chairman, formed a committee to investigate plausible monopolies in the oil industry. Somehow, the main focus was on the contribution of the railroad system to the oil monopolization. Rockefeller, although he became one of the wealthiest men through this monopolizing, he maintained a low and was not suspected.
In 1882, the Standard Oil Company officially became a trust, introducing centralized control. The Standard Oil Company influenced many other major American business organizations, and in all likelihood, wildly helped to lead to the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. The idea of the trust was not brought by Rockefeller or any of the main trustees, but it was brought by attorney Samuel Dodd, who worked for Standard Oil. How it worked was a board of trustees was set up, and all the Standard properties were placed in its hands. Every stockholder received 20 trust certificates for each share of Standard Oil stock. All the profits of the component companies were sent to the 9 trustees, who determined the dividends. The 9 trustees elected the directors and officers of all the component companies, which are the holding companies. This allowed the Standard Oil Company to function as a monopoly, since the 9 trustees ran all the component companies. The Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 was the first and most significant in the U.S. antitrust laws. It outlawed trusts and prohibited illegal monopolies. The act applies to both domestic companies and foreign companies operating business inside the United States. With the passage of the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1892, the State Supreme Court of Ohio ruled in the favor of the dissolution of the Standard Oil Company Trust. The trust was dissolved only in name. for the trustees kept their shares of the Standard Oil Company. Since the company could not be a trust anymore, it became a holding company in June 1899, the Standard Oil of New Jersey. There are 5 key differences between a trust and a holding company. The first one is the mode of formation. When a combination trust is formed, the shareholders of different companies transfer their shares to the trust to be held by the trustees on their behalf. Thus, the shareholders become beneficiaries of the trust agreement. In the case of holding company, the holding company acquires majority of the shares in the subsidiary companies. 2. Management. The affairs of the trust are managed by a board of trustees. It is the board of trustees which nominates the directors of the constituent units, but management of the holding company vests in a board of directors elected by the shareholders of the holding company. The directors take direct interest in the management of the holding company. 3. Relationship. The different subsidiaries of a holding company are independent of one another, whereas the constituent units are dependent in case of trust. 4. Stability. A holding company appears to be more stable, though it can be disbanded easily by the sale of shares of subsidiary companies in the open market. However, a trust agreement is generally for a long period and it cannot be easily brought to an end. Lastly, sharing of profit. The profit of the trust companies are shared by all the constituent units. On the other hand, the subsidiary companies do not share the profits of the holding company. Nonetheless, the shareholders of the holding company get the benefit of the working of all the subsidiaries. The holding company had to fight its way through the courtroom more and more often, and on May 15, 1911, the U.S. Supreme Court declared Standard Oil Holding Company an unreasonable trust and ordered that it to be dissolved. By the time of the dismantlement of Standard Oil, John D. Rockefeller was not running the company anymore. He officially retired in the year 1897. Throughout his oil tycoon reign, Rockefeller was very generous in his giving. By the time of his death, he has given away more than $80 million. With help from his son, John D. Rockefeller Jr., they created major philanthropic institutions, including the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research in New York City, the General Education Board, and the Rockefeller Foundation. Rockefeller's benefactions during his lifetime totaled more than $500 million.
John D. Rockefeller. That was his life. How do you see him? Do you see him as captain of industry, robber baron, or just an average businessman? Well, that's all for now. But come back next week, and we'll look at another History's Mysteries. I'm Walt Whitaker. Have a good night.